This is NBV3E, Grade 11 Native Studies, and the course is Beliefs, Values, and Aspirations of Aboriginal Peoples in Contemporary Society. I'm Pete, and I'm your teacher for the course. So we're sort of wrapping things up on Unit 1 today. We're going to start the Lesson 5. And we may, I'm not quite sure if we'll get through the whole thing, but if not, we have tomorrow, because there's 4 classes per week. And so we have tomorrow. And if we do get all the way through Lesson 5, we can use the class tomorrow to kind of look back on this first unit and maybe fill in some details that we didn't quite get to the first time around. Right. So I've been putting the pages that you need on my Facebook page. There might be some that I'll post tomorrow that'll kind of help us out. And so the topic of today's lesson, it's called Modern Economy and Challenges. And just before we get started, I just want to, so this is about economy. This is about commerce, buying, selling things. And if you remember, yesterday we were talking about economy, trade, and resources. And we kind of looked at the different types of economies, right? The subsistence economy, the market economy, and the concept of supply and demand. So my question to you, just to think about, maybe you can talk to somebody about it since we can't have a class discussion. Say, would you be able to go without online shopping? Okay, so would you be able to go without online shopping? Okay, so how important is online shopping to you? Okay, so, and that's just, you think about it, right? And it's kind of a bit of a, complex issue in some ways. Online shopping is a fairly new thing, but yet it seems to be everywhere, right? And a good example is, I like going out in the bush, and I like wandering around, snowshoeing, right? Just going out. But I actually got my snowshoes by shopping online. Right? I didn't make them. I didn't ask someone to make them for me, right? I got them, shipped to me from Winnipeg. I guess is probably where it came from. So, that's my that's my worldview. It's not really a worldview. It's just that's the way I think about things. If I need something, I'll go online and I'll buy it. But so it would be very difficult for me to be if I wasn't able to do that, right? Because I don't have a lot of the skills that I would need to kind of replace some of the stuff I buy online, right? And I know people that can make snowshoes, and I know people that can make clothes, and they can make mucklucks and all sorts of things. I can't do that, so yeah, I'd be pretty well stuck. So that was the question. Just kind of lead in here was. Would you be able to go without online shopping? How would it affect you, basically? So think about it, maybe talk to someone about it. Just maybe something to think about, right? And really, you could change that. You can actually kind of substitute any kind of thing that's really kind of part of the modern economy, right? For example, could you go without television? Could you go without your satellite, right? Could you go without your Xbox or video games, stuff like that? Could you live without that? Do you? I mean, do you go out on the land for weeks, months at a time, and go without that? So it's difficult to unplug for some people. Definitely very difficult. So let's take a look then at unit lesson 5, and let's see if we can find it here. I got lesson 4 there. So maybe that's lesson 5 right there. Indeed, lesson 5. So that's on page 29. It's actually on page 30 of your unit 1. Now, if you don't have unit 2 yet, you really need to ask the DEC for it. If for some reason you can't get it from the DEC, contact me ASAP. As soon as possible, I'll get you that unit 2, because you're going to need it. Certainly, you'll need it on Monday. All right. So here's lesson 5. So it says modern Aboriginal economy and challenges, modern economy and challenges. But really, we're going to actually talk a little bit about how we got to that modern economy. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the history of that, sort of how things developed. Now, as usual, they have some keywords for you. The course material goes between definitions, and then they talk about keywords. So, but basically, it's just some things for you to define at the beginning, just before you start reading the course material, to make sure that you're ready to understand it as best as possible. Right? You may not even necessarily understand the definition, or in some cases, there's several versions, like the word or phrase has several meanings. Not really sure which one you're going to need, right? So, but it's okay. That's what learning's all about. You're going to learn read the definition, and it'll kind of you'll have it in mind. Even if it's not exactly correct, you'll still have a definition in mind. So script, and if you go and you look up script, there's different definitions for it, and that's the thing, right? But what I'm thinking they mean is a certificate entitling the holder to acquire possession of certain portions of public land. That's what I think they mean by that. Now, it could be something else. There is another definition which basically, it's something you can trade for something of value, right? So essentially, it's like money, right? But I think that they're going for that second definition, a certificate entitling the holder to acquire possession of certain portions of public land. So, but when we encounter it in the course text, then we'll look at it then. Now, the next one then is eco-cultural tourism. Eco-cultural tourism. So, this is something I actually thought about quite a bit, because, there's such nice nice places in the north, right? Such scenic things that I actually wondered if people were promoting tourism, right? In some of the communities, if they wanted that, right? Maybe you don't want tourists coming to a community, but that would, it's a way of making some money, and giving people a look at what it's like in the north, that the beauty and the nature and the land and everything like that. So eco-cultural tourism, it seems that is a catchphrase that came from a paper that was written by somebody, because it's repeated quite a bit. It says a concept in which ecological and cultural aspects of a landscape are combined to create a site for tourists. So let's say that you want to get some tourists, right? And so you go around and you get someone that surveyed the local birds, okay? And then they go and you put an ad, maybe in a tour magazine, or maybe you send a flyer to you send a flyer out to different vacation planners, right? Or travel agents. It's just saying, hey, you can come up, right, and we'll have a guide, and they'll take you around and show you all the different birds in our community, right, and you can stay in this nice place, and we can have a fire at night. And so that is eco-cultural tourism, right? And so those people would pay money, and there's some people that are very well off that would probably pay a lot of money for that. The other possibility, maybe someone just wants to go fishing. Maybe someone just wants to go canoeing. Maybe someone wants to see what it looks like, up north. Just walk around, go hiking in the wilderness. And certainly lots of people want to go see the aurora at night, These are all things that are there. They're already there, so it wouldn't cost a lot of money to develop. Okay, but it brings new challenges and new issues to the community. Anyway, that's eco-cultural tourism. That's what they're talking about. Okay. And then they talk about oh um, oh grab the wrong trade. The action of buying and selling goods and services. Okay, now that's one definition of it. I think that's the one we're looking at. So the action of buying and selling goods and services. The other possible definition is a trade, which is a skill, right? So a carpenter, electrician, plumber, those are called a trade. Plumbing, and so the trade is just you've been the person's been trained, they've been tested and licensed, and so they're ready to do that particular activity, and they're called trades, and there's a bunch of them. Okay. So there we go. But I think, yeah, and see, I'm not really sure now whether it's the action of buying and selling goods, which is also trade, or a trade, which is a skill. Anyway, we'll find out. So the next thing then is to take a look at different aspects of the economy and basically how First Nations people make money, how they historically made money, or how they, how the economy went. I guess we wouldn't say made money because initially it was trading, right? Trading goods, right? And that's what we saw yesterday. There was a good trade in resources, actually not good resources. And then the fur trade started, European contact, and then the economy changed. The way First Nations people, their economy worked changed quite dramatically. Okay. Now, the text, then, we're going to look at the text. This starts on page 85. So if you have a text, you want to turn to page 85. Now, if you don't have a text, I'm going to keep posting these pages, and I have a copy of it right here. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, so this is page, yeah, there it is right there. Let's see if I can bring it up. So it's on the left here. I'm going to zoom in just a little wee bit. Oh, we're already at 200. Should I zoom in at 300? Okay, well, let's see if that works. Okay, yeah, okay. So here it is, the modern economy. So this is from your text, page 85. So it says the Dominion of Canada was created in 1867. So this is a while ago, and consisted of the provinces of Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Ontario. More settlers began to arrive, and the economy moved away from the fur trade and into farming, commerce, and manufacturing. So that's really kind of important, isn't it? Right? Because the fur trade, somebody, I don't know why my pen's like that. Anyway, I think it's because we're zoomed in. Anyway, pretty big line I just made there. So now notice the fur trade, that Aboriginal people were harvesting furs, right? They were the ones that were getting the furs and trading or selling them to the Europeans, to the Hudson's Bay Company, to the Northwest Company, right? But now take a look at what it's changed to once 1867 and the Dominion of Canada came along. Now it's farming. Okay, well, how many First Nation people were farming, right? I mean, harvesting wild rice or harvesting blueberries or some other things, but not necessarily doing a lot of farming. Not the type of farming, raising farm animals and growing crops that European settlers were doing, right? Commerce, which is buying and selling goods, like you need some food for your farm animals, so you buy it at the store, right? You don't go onto the land and get it. You buy it from the store. You're riding around with horses. They need to have shoes. They need to have harnesses. You need a wagon, right? You go buy those at the store. You don't go and make them yourself. That's commerce, right? And manufacturing. So the farming, they use plows, right? They use machinery on the farm, right? And that has to be manufactured. Again, that's not something that an Aboriginal community would be doing back in 1867. They weren't really manufacturing things. They were still, they were geared to the fur trade and to other types of resource trading, but not necessarily manufacturing machines and stuff like that. Okay. So it says, as the focus shifted from the fur trade, the situation of Aboriginal peoples was also altered. Yeah. First Nations people were placed on reserve lands. Okay, so there's the other thing that happened during the treaty process, which you're going to learn about anyway. The Métis lost their lands as what would become the provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta were settled by newcomers. And beginning in the 1950s, many Inuit were relocated from their traditional lands to permanent settlement in small communities in the north. These events reduced access that Aboriginal peoples had to the lands that supported their lives and their economies. Right? Now, the questions of who owned the lands and who owned the lands and who had the right to harvest natural resources would also be complicated by expanding treaty agreements, changing federal and provincial policies, and different worldviews. There it is, right? That's that worldview thing again, right? We talked yesterday and sort of come up that certainly at the time, the Aboriginal people didn't really consider land as something that could be bought and sold, right? The worldview was that the Creator gave Aboriginal people the land to use and to sustain them, and for them to look after, right? To be respectful of it. And so here the federal government, the provincial government, the Dominion of Canada forms, and now they're buying and selling land. Right? So then it says, unquestionably, as Canada moved into the 20th century, so that was last century, beginning of the last century, the economic activities of Aboriginal peoples would undergo great change. Okay, so that's, you sort of now get to see how the economy changed for Aboriginal people, and not for the better, right? At least certainly not with the end of the fur trade. Okay. Now, the next thing. Now, so we're going to maybe just, I don't know, say that we jump around, but you're welcome to read everything in the text. You should read everything in the text. But for the purposes of just going through the course material, I'm going to skip around a little bit here. Not going to do everything. So the next thing in the course material, they talk about, I'll flip back here and see what they say. So I think that they just kind of summarize it a little bit here on page 30 of Unit 1. Right, they talk about the modern economy, and so after Confederation, that's when the Dominion of Canada was created. The economy moved away from the fur trade. Treaties were signed, and Métis were driven off their traditional lands. Okay, so it's summarizing what we just looked at. Okay, so then we're going to talk a little bit about mixed economies, and so sort of the way that Aboriginal people kind of transitioned from what they were traditionally doing and sort of adapted to the new reality. Okay, and that is going to be, okay, that is on page 85 of the course text, and they actually in the course text calls it changing economies, and in the course material, your unit 1, lesson 5, they call it mixed economies. I don't know why they do that. So let's go back and take a look at that. So that's the middle of page 85, and there we are, we're right here. Okay, so changing economies. So it says, now facing a more limited land base and fewer resources, Aboriginal people sought new ways to support themselves, and for the most part, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people across Canada took part in mixed economies. So I'm just going to pause there and just say, now remember we're talking about the turn of the century around 1900. Okay, so the last century, around 1900. Um, Economic activities such as agriculture, okay, trapping, hunting, fishing, and harvesting wild rice were mixed with newer sources of income, such as seasonal employment, the production of crafts or other products such as canoes, and when necessary, social assistance. Other sources of income included the commercial fishery, guiding, guiding, high steel work on bridges or skyscrapers, and mining. Some Aboriginal men joined the Canadian Army or the Navy. As Aboriginal communities developed, residents also worked to improve their economic situation by lobbying governments about land use or asking for compensation for resource extraction on their lands. Sort of, it makes sense, right? Somebody's making money, harvesting trees or digging up gold, and it's it's important that the traditional lands, um, not that the community gets something for that, for the use of that. Okay, because otherwise the community would be using it for their traditional activities. Okay, so now here's the thing, and this is a kind of a key. It says most First Nations maintain the rights to hunt and fish on the land after signing treaties with the Government of Canada. They were able to hunt and fish on Crown lands, but these areas were constantly being reduced as new settlers bought land. When the Natural Resources Transfer Act was passed in 1930, it transferred the management and revenue of natural resources from the federal government to the provinces. Okay. The provinces had no treaty agreements on hunting and fishing with First Nations people, and new game laws resulted in challenges to hunting rights, or in some cases, legal action. As you read in Chapter 2, First Nations trappers would also be required to get licenses for their trap lines, although they and their families had trapped in those areas for generations. Okay, and that happens. There's still things going on where people's traditional lands, they're being denied access to their traditional lands. There was recently a case in our area that was just recently settled where an Aboriginal person built a little house on her family's traditional lands, and the government moved in, and it got silly. It was settled in a good way, but it was really kind of a um, it shocked a lot of people. And so these cases are still going on. All right, so that was the changing economies. Okay, so now then on the next page, this is going to be page 86 of the course text. We talk about the development of communities, and okay, there we go. See, this is where they define script in the course text. A piece of paper used to certify possession of land could be exchanged for money. Well, there you go. Okay, so certified possession of land. Interesting. So sort of matches the definition um, that we had, a certificate entitling the holder to acquire possession of certain portions of public land. Could be exchanged for money. Well, of course, sort of like the deed to a property, maybe. I don't really know. Interesting. So basically, just a piece of paper that says that you could possess land, own it, use it. I'm not really sure what they say possession there. Um, hmm. Okay, so then we talk about the development of communities, and they will talk about some of the communities. I don't know if we're going to go through all of this. So the British North America Act, 1867, and the Indian Act, 1876, outlined the ways in which the First Nations were to be treated by the Crown. The Indian Act did not include the Métis and Inuit, however, so First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities developed in different ways. Okay, so let's see what happened to the Métis. The Métis regarded themselves as a nation, a blending of two cultures that incorporated economies such as farming, bison hunting in the west, and the fur trade. The Métis were not granted land or support through treaties, resulting in many cases of poverty and the disintegration of farming communities. Eventually, some land in the west was set aside and allocated under a scrip system. This system was by most accounts abused by land speculators who bought scrip for a fraction of its real value, then sold the land to settlers at a profit. In the end, only about one quarter of the land set aside within the scrip system was actually occupied by Métis. Many Métis remained in areas that later developed into towns or cities. In Ontario, these communities are Sault Ste. Marie, Penetanguishene, and Timmins. They and their descendants would make a living through seasonal work, fishing and hunting, employment in forestry or mining, or operating their own businesses. Okay. In 1896, the federal government set aside 37,000 hectares of farmland for Métis people near St. Paul, Alberta. Each family was to receive 32 hectares as well as livestock and equipment. 30 Métis families from across Alberta and Saskatchewan moved to St. Paul des Métis in the first year. However, the promised livestock and equipment did not arrive. Families drifted away, and rather than continue as farmers, the Métis went north to hunt, trap, and fish again. Okay, so there you go. I don't know the history of that, and it would be interesting to kind of look and see what happened specifically. But it sort of looks like there was some promises not kept. Not that's still going on, but so and people were, they relocated with the expectation that they would take up farming, and then they weren't really set up to be successful. All right. So, now, they do talk a little bit about farming communities. Okay, so this is interesting. I see here that some First Nations were doing farming, so that's something. They grew crops such as beans, corn, and squash. Interesting. All right. How's the wind at? That's interesting to me. Okay, and then whoops, no. I gotta scroll sideways here. All right, let's see if I can remember how to. There we go. Okay, and then there's some things to read in the textbook. This is the bottom of page, I'll tell you what page it is. This is the bottom of page 87 in the text. So they were promoting farming as a means of support for First Nations. So that's right at the turn of the century. This plan met with mixed success, and when I was sort of skeptical about the farming, thinking about Ontario and especially Northern Ontario, that's a pretty hard deal to actually farm, right? In the type of farming that's economically viable. It's further south. I'm sure it's fine, and on the west coast, I'm sure it would work. But in Northern Ontario, it'd be a hard thing to do. So now here it says, in many cases, farm equipment and livestock were part of treaty agreements as First Nations leaders recognized the need for new sources of income and food for their people. And so then they're talking about farming equipment. And then they basically said it failed because the government didn't really set them up for success. Okay, and then Southern Ontario. Okay, farming became an important economic activity in communities such as Wata Mohawk Territory near Georgian Bay. Mohawk families moved to the area from Kanesatake. I know this one, Kanesatake. It's funny when you hear the name It's one thing when you read it, it's different. Doesn't look the same. Quebec. Okay. So, and then I can go to the next page. So, the Southern Ontario farming, definitely part of it. They cleared established farms, and so it looks like there were some successful First Nations farm enterprises in Southern Ontario. Okay. So, and then there was, they're going to talk a little bit about urban, urban, well, I guess we can talk about it. It's a very short little section here. So it says on page 89, no, page 88, sort of just a little blurb. It says First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people living in urban areas typically have more employment and educational opportunities. Life expectancy is also higher. Across Canada, urban Aboriginal populations are growing. Statistics Canada indicates that in 2006, 54% of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in Canada lived in an urban centre, which was an increase from 50% in 1996. However, populations of Aboriginal people within urban areas are also very mobile, and numbers are constantly changing as people move around within urban areas or between urban areas and reserves. This can make it harder for Aboriginal peoples to access services for housing, health, and education. Okay, I'm just, that's about what we're going to talk about there. And I will say that I think people in general are more mobile than they used to be nowadays. I mean, if I think of, my own history, like I've lived in so many different places. I basically go where the work is what it really comes down to. Or, in some cases I move for school, right? So that's it. Just move wherever is the best opportunity, and a lot of Canadians do that. So I don't think it's to say that First Nations people move around a lot. Well, yeah, Canadians move around a lot. Everyone does, you know. So it's, yeah, you hear about something, and you go for it, right? Okay. And I know that our students wants to move around quite a bit, and they're um, following opportunities. Okay, so now let's see where. Okay, I'm just trying to see where the next little bit is, because we're going to talk about. I hope I'm not in. I hope I didn't get the wrong page here. Yeah. Oh yeah, remote communities in the north. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. I think it might be on this page here. I'm not used to this. Kind of just having to scroll sideways. No, modern. Okay, I think I just kind of skipped it a little bit. Urban settings. Yeah, okay. I think it might be over here. There we go. Okay, remote communities in the north. All right, remote northern communities present a unique challenges to economic development. The federal government had very little presence in the north until the mid-1900s with the construction of radar lines, the DEW Distant Early Warning System, during World War II and the subsequent Cold War. Prior to this time, contact was limited to the RCMP, missionaries, whalers, and traders. Okay, so basically it's in the federal government's interest to have people in the north, right? Because it kind of solidifies our claim to the fact that the northern part of the country is Canadian. It's occupied by Canadians, right? So it is in the government's interest to have people there, right? Now, it says when change came, it came very quickly. Inuit families accustomed to traveling and gathering at specific times were now encouraged to settle in permanent towns. Within a few decades, many Inuit were living in prefabricated matchbox houses shipped in from the south. Schools, nursing stations, and churches were also built. Electricity and equipment such as snowmobiles were introduced. Okay, so all of that stuff, now it's sort of, right, you don't feed your snowmobile, right? You gotta give it gas. You gotta get gas. Gas is not something you can just go out and harvest. right? Or gather. You gotta somehow buy it from somebody. And these are the changes, right? Where before people were more self-sufficient and they could attend to their own needs from the land, and now suddenly they have all this stuff that has to be maintained through outside supplies. So, faced with a sudden change in their way of life, many Inuit looked for new ways to support themselves and their families. Occasional employment with the RCMP or in resource development augmented trapping, hunting, and fishing. In the late 1950s, cooperatives began to form in various Inuit communities as a way for local people to share resources and make a living. Inuit-owned and operated cooperatives were and still are very successful. The first cooperative was the George River Eskimo Fishermen's Cooperative, which supported the local fishing economy by renting a freezer and marketing to the south. Within 10 years, the cooperative had expanded into timber and the arts and crafts industries, and had also built a co-op store where local people could purchase goods, gasoline, and other items. Okay, and there are certainly co-op stores in Ontario as well, right? Northern in northern communities in Ontario. I don't want to say the northern store because that's there too, but there are other stores. So that really is a change, isn't it? And so there was certainly quite a bit of adaptation, but it happened, and people somehow got along. Now, even there were changes in transportation, right? And of course, the canoe is the main thing, right? The toboggan or the snowshoe, okay? And that was the way that people would get around. And certainly prior to the 1870s, transportation, long distance transportation was through water, right? So it was a water-based transportation system. Okay, so that all changed, and two things kind of came up. Okay, so the railway. Okay, and Sioux Lookout, where I live, is kind of started as a railway stop, I guess, as a kind of a hub, and now it's a kind of also a transportation hub. So the creation of railways in Canada was a major contributor to economic growth and settlement, right? Because people could go out west, people could move around. Railways meant that resources and goods could be transported more quickly, and they opened up remote areas to forestry and mining. Railways also linked isolated settlements to major cities and towns, and populations boomed. However, and this is the thing, right? Railway building in Canada had major impacts on First Nations and Métis people. Land used for construction of railways was often taken without the consent of Aboriginal peoples. Railways also brought more settlers to increasing conflicts over land. On the prairies, the railways expanded the trade of bison meat, hides, and bones. Traders no longer had to rely on Plains Nations and Métis to process and transport bison hides. Larger numbers of bison were killed, and overhunting devastated the ways of life of many Plains Nations and the Métis. In British Columbia, the construction of the railway along the Fraser and Thompson rivers damaged or destroyed rivers, affecting those First Nations that relied on fishing. So that's it, right? It's seemed like a good idea at the time, but that railway did quite a bit of damage to First Nations people, and it caused quite a few changes. Okay, and then the next one is air travel. Okay. So it says and this is, by the way, this is on page 90, near the bottom of page 90 of the course text. Okay. So for the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who live in remote communities, transportation is vital. Air transportation has been beneficial in many ways, as it provides access to even the most rural and remote communities. It also enables those communities to bring in supplies and services that were previously inaccessible to them. Several small airlines operate in northern areas, such as Air Quebec. Yeah, I've flown Air Quebec. And Thunder Air on the west coast. Wasaya here, Slate Falls Airways, right? Bemidji Airways, quite a few here, and SkyCare is the other one. So yeah, so a lot of them I probably missed a few. However, air travel to and from remote communities is very expensive, really. It's therefore not. Yeah, really, they have to say that. Well, but okay, let's just back up a little bit, because keep in mind that a lot of people could read this who don't know, right? Who maybe aren't familiar with the North. So, because someone, this textbook could be used down south, and they just don't know, right? They think it's the same as, that they like WestJet, where you can travel between major cities for $100, just like the bus. Okay, so anyway, they have to say it in the text. So it is very expensive, and it's not available to everyone. And goods shipped in by air are also highly priced, right? Yeah, and we all know that here, at least. So, um, and then of course, accessibility to goods and services had an impact on ways of life. In the North, some communities have struggled with health problems related to a diet of processed southern foods. Hunters who once used dog sleds may now opt to use snowmobiles to travel, which in turn means paying for expensive gas and repairs, of course, right? So yeah, we mentioned that, right? And if you go to some of the, if you go to the northern store, some of the stores, and you see, the aisles, and how much of the aisle is taken up by chips and pops and candies and stuff like that, which is probably not the best kind of stuff to be eating, really, for anybody. But they're gonna, because they have an idea of supply and demand, right? In a market economy, they will put out the stuff that sells the best, right? And chips and pop is what sells the best, right? So that's why there's so many aisles full of pops and chips in some of the stores in the north. Okay, and plus it's very expensive, right, to get like vegetables and fruits and stuff. Okay, um, so let's see. Um, yeah, we got a little bit of time here. Remember, if we don't get through all this tonight, we can continue tomorrow. It's probably just as well, because one of the things about learning is that we sometimes have to look at stuff and think about it for a while before we really understand it. Sometimes you have to go back and take another look, and that's perfectly normal. It's the way it goes. We're all familiar with the really smart person who can read something and remember it perfectly, or learn a math problem, how to solve a math problem and then be able to solve it. But most people really don't learn that way. They'll pick up some things really quickly, and some things they have to spend a little time at. And that's really the way most people learn. Okay, so, you know, if you read through this and it doesn't make a lot of sense the first time, that's fine, right? You can think about it for a while and then go back, try to do some of the questions, and then go back and read through it again. And it'll make much more sense. It'll be a lot clearer the next time. Okay, it really does work. Okay, and I know there's sort of a tendency, maybe a temptation to say, well, I didn't understand it the first time, I'm not going to try again. But really you should, because it'll make a big difference. Okay, so don't get discouraged. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the last little bit here. Um, they call it the Aboriginal Resurgence, and at the course text they just talk about sustainable development. Let's go back and the course material. So now this is page 31, and they talk about Aboriginals rebound in the text, right? So it says, beginning in the 1970s, Aboriginals, well, now they're using, found employment in the oil fields of Alberta, the mines of northern Canada, or the fisheries in the Maritimes. These were seasonal or temporary jobs. When resources were located on or near their traditional territories, bands negotiated with the corporations. They asked for specialized job training and or mentorships for their band members. Right? And it makes sense, right? A diamond mining company wants to come and rip open your land that you would otherwise be using, you got to get something out of that, right? It makes sense. And in the modern times, I'm pretty sure that companies understand that, right? They understand that they have an obligation to the people whose land they're gonna you know, drill holes in or scoop up or, you know, shake out and you know, take stuff from, right? So there we go. So right. So the communities would negotiate, and you know, sometimes it gets a little testy, but that's, I think companies are getting better, and they understand that they really have to have what we call it is buy-in from the community. The community has to agree to it, right? And we've seen it. You know, it's been in the news in some cases out west where the local community, and you know, not even necessarily Aboriginal people, but just everybody, um, you know, the local population didn't want somebody you know, doing some drilling or something like that to do with pipelines, and it really got very contentious because you know, the company was trying to do something that the community rejected. So that can happen, and companies are aware of that. At least smart companies now are aware of that. So when we talk about the resurgence, there is an idea, a concept of sustainable development. Okay, so we're just going to skip a little bit ahead in the course text now, and we'll talk about sustainable development. And we'll probably just be able to kind of just get started with this tonight, and then we'll finish it up tomorrow. So um, let's see what the course text has to say about this. Let's go for a little bit here. There it is, sustainable development. So it advocates the use of resources in a way that meets human needs while also preserving the environment so that needs can be met both in the present and the future. Right? This idea became popular in the 1970s and is still widely used today. However, this concept has been around since the beginning of time for many Aboriginal peoples. Well, of course, and is the seven generations teaching of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. Okay, I'm gonna have to get someone to teach me how to say that. Um, so it's the seven generations teaching. For First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, sustainable development considers the following key aspects. Okay, and you know, this, I think we've seen this before, right? Earth is a life-giving force that is to be respected. There is a time and season for all activities. Take only what you need. Balance is needed among the four basic elements of nature: air, which provides life; earth, which provides life-sustaining resources and food; fire, which provides heat and light; and water, which makes life grow and growth possible. Everyone and everything has a place and a role, and no person, animal, or thing is to be taken for granted. These aspects of sustainable development are essential in creating a world that can provide for everyone now and in the future, right? And this, you know, we think about the gold mine and how they're going to dig a big hole and they're going to make a pond where they're going to put the water that has cyanide in it, right? That's what they use. And somehow they're going to fill the hole back in when they're done, and then the pond, somehow they have an idea that if they just leave the pond, it'll go back to the way it was. And you see, this is what we talk about. We really have to ask them questions when they want to do that, because it doesn't do anybody any good to, you know, they make the gold mine, they get all the gold and they go away, and then there's a big pond of cyanide there, right? The very poisonous material, and that's not going to serve future generations, because future generations are going to come along and there'll be this pool of cyanide, right? They can't drink that water. Any animals that try to drink that water will die, and you know, and hopefully right away, because otherwise, if the animal drinks that water and then doesn't quite die, is kind of flopping around, some other animal will eat it, and yeah, it's terrible, right? So whenever these developments come in, whenever there's some ideas for making money from the land, these are things that people have to really think about and consider, and not just sort of say, yeah, it'll be fine, we'll take care of it, but really ask very, really hard questions. Okay, well, let's leave it there for tonight, because we do have another class tomorrow, and we had the full 2 weeks to finish off Unit 1. So we'll finish off Lesson 5 tomorrow. We'll just wrap this up and do some of the support questions and look at the key questions, and then we'll go back and kind of have a look at where we've come in Unit 1. Okay, I'll put some of these pages up on my Facebook page tomorrow. And until then, thanks for watching and for participating, and I will see you tomorrow.